Okay, so if you ask me to stay with a dead corpse for hours, here's my answer. Bye! Caution! The following video is an in-depth review of the video game I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't played this video game yet, then please feel free to play this video game first before watching this video. However, if you have already played this video game, or you just want to know my thoughts on this video game, then keep watching. So, I've been playing video games ever since I was a kid, and the types of video games that I normally play are RPG, platforming, fighting, strategy, and adventure games. So imagine my surprise when I stumbled upon a game on Steam called Pumpkin Eater, which is a visual novel. What is a visual novel, you ask? Well, a visual novel is a genre of interactive media that is usually considered a type of video game, and it basically focuses a lot on the narrative side of the gameplay, and it features the player just pressing a button to progress the story. Now, there's been a debate about whether or not visual novels should be considered video games, since most visual novels don't really have a specific gameplay style, like RPG or platforming. Instead, most visual novels often involve just clicking on the scenes within the games in order to progress through the story. But for this review, I included this visual novel as part of the video game reviews because either way, you are interacting with the world that the characters reside in by clicking on the scenes to progress the narrative. Also, this visual novel was available on Steam, which is a gaming site, so there's that. But anyway, now that we got the whole debate about whether or not visual novels are considered video games out of the way, let's talk a bit about Pumpkin Eater. Pumpkin Eater was a psychological horror visual novel that was created by Thugzilla in 2021. And another interesting thing about this visual novel was that this is my very first visual novel that I ever read and played through. So reviewing this game will be an interesting experience for me. But before we get into my thoughts about this visual novel, I would like to give out a brief summary of this visual novel. The story starts off with the death of a young boy who was accidentally hit by a car that was driven by his own father, and his head ended up being crushed in the process. The mother was so distraught by her son's death that she decided to put a pumpkin on the body of her son's corpse in place of his head, and pretend that the boy was still alive. However, this only causes problems for the family, as both the father and the daughter, Gloria, knew that the boy was dead. But the mother forced them to play along with this ruse. Things only get worse for the family as the mother's sanity continues to go downhill throughout the story. So of course my very first visual novel ended up being a psychological horror story. But that's what made me really enjoy this story. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the story itself. I was truly amazed by how horrifying and entertaining the story really was. Even though I have seen a lot of movies and read a lot of books that dealt with the death of a child, I have never come across a visual novel that took that concept and turned it into something truly horrifying and insane. The fact that this visual novel is about how a child's death ended up making a parent go insane and also tear a loving family apart really made the story so engaging to read through. But what was truly creepy about the story was how the mother's sanity started going further downhill the more that she believed that her son was still alive and treated the decaying corpse as her own child. The fact that this visual novel gradually shows us how a parent starts going insane over the loss of their child and starts doing horrible things in the name of love was really intriguing to me. It's unlike anything that I've ever seen before any video game or visual novel, since I've rarely seen games tackle this type of subject matter and present it in such a fairly realistic and horrifying way. Another horrifying aspect of the story itself was how descriptive it got with describing the boy's decaying body throughout the story. Strap in, folks, I'm about to gross you out in several sentences. The fact that the narrative kept describing the boy's body slowly decaying throughout the story, using lovely descriptions such as the boy's limbs falling off, the body starts to go through some discoloration, and worse yet, maggots start to crawl all over the boy's body, made me feel very uncomfortable at times, especially whenever they are mentioning the maggots. Even though they don't really show us the boy's decaying body in full detail, the descriptions and the sound effects alone made me cringe with horror at the whole situation. Another aspect of the story that I really liked was how creepy the atmosphere was. The story has an oppressive dark atmosphere that made me feel scared at times, and I love how the music goes from being quiet yet threatening to downright loud and horrifying whenever the situation gets worse for the family. Now that I talked about the story, let's talk about the characters themselves. There's really not much to say about each character since this visual novel is pretty short, but their actions throughout the story really made each of them pretty interesting. The character that I was the most interested in was the mother herself. Out of all the characters in this visual novel, the mother was the one who goes through the most drastic change in her character. She started off the story as being a loving parent, but after her son dies, she starts to slowly go insane in the story as she takes the boy's corpse, places a pumpkin on top of said corpse, and starts pretending that her son is still alive. Even when the corpse starts decaying throughout the story, the mother wasn't bothered by that, despite the fact that this is something that would terrify any human being. I found her to be the most interesting character in the entire story because it was terrifying seeing how her sanity eventually corrupted her. Her sanity got so bad that she actually murdered an innocent boy to steal his body, when her dead son's own body started decaying so badly that his limbs were falling off, and the mother wanted a new body for her dead son. Another character that I wanted to talk about was the father. The father was a pretty interesting character to me. When it was revealed that he was the one who killed his son, a bit accidentally, I was curious to see how he would react throughout the story. It seemed like the father was trying to be the most rational member of the family, as he tried to get his wife to understand that their son is dead and that she should stop treating her son's corpse like it's alive. But unfortunately, the father eventually starts going along with the mother's delusions, which I will admit surprised me a bit. It was a bit of a sharp shift in the father's personality that he went from not being afraid to stand up to his wife to eventually submitting to her delusions. I guess the father got really drained from the events of the story and just couldn't fight back anymore. And I will admit that I didn't feel that sorry for the father when he ends up in prison at the end of the story, because apparently he cared more about his reputation than about the well-being of his family, and that just ended up hurting his family even more. And then the last character that I wanted to talk about is Gloria, the daughter. Gloria is the character that I sympathize with the most, since she's the only one in the family who is very aware of the boy's death and actually tried to convince her mother that the boy is officially dead. Unfortunately, since the mother's sanity went downhill after the boy's death, there wasn't much that Gloria could do to convince her otherwise, and she was forced to sleep with the boy's dead corpse. I seriously do feel bad for Gloria, since she suffers a lot throughout the story. Despite being the sanest member of the family, and the fact that her mother tried to kill her towards the end of the story really made me feel bad for her situation. Now let's talk about the gameplay. There's actually not that much to say about the gameplay, since, as I mentioned before, this is a visual novel, and the goal of most visual novels is to focus on the narrative aspect. So for most of the visual novel, you're just clicking on the scenes in order to progress through the story. The gameplay kind of reminds me of the Living Book series that I used to play a lot as a child.
He's really a vampire with magical powers,
said Chris.
With that series, you also click on the scenes to progress the story. However, in the case of the Living Book series, you can also click on any random object in the background to see them do any kind of activity that's not directly tied to the story. That's not the case here for Pumpkin Eater, as you just click on the scenes and automatically go to the next part of the story. This type of gameplay is nice for people who are more focused on the story aspect of video games and just want to read a story of a visual novel. Now, the only real issue that I have with this visual novel is that I wish that they developed the boy's character a bit more. We don't really know that much about the boy before he died, except that he was apparently reckless, and we don't even see his actual face before it got crushed by the father's car. Even though the boy's death jumpstarts the plot of the story, I think that his death would have had more impact if we had learned more about what the boy was like before he died, and how his death greatly impacted his family. Also, and this is a minor issue for me, but I wish that the visual novel was a bit longer. Maybe we could have had more scenes of what the family was like before the boy died, or more scenes of showing us what the boy was like before he died. Now, there is no specific rating for Pumpkin Eater, but they mentioned that this game is for a mature audience. According to them, the story contains child endangerment and graphic depictions of violence and human decomposition. This is actually a pretty accurate description of the story itself. The visual novel does contain a lot of scenes where they are going into great detail about how the boy's body starts decomposing, and that can be very unsettling to a lot of people. Also, there are scenes where Gloria's parents are abusive towards Gloria after the boy's death, and that can hit a bit too close to home for anyone who had to deal with domestic and child abuse. Overall, I give Pumpkin Eater a score of a 9.8 out of 10. Even though I wish that they developed the boy's character a bit more, and I wish that the visual novel was a bit longer in order to fully develop the family as a whole, I still really enjoyed this visual novel. The fact that this visual novel had such a creepy atmosphere that was both terrifying and exciting really made me love this novel. Anyone who wants to read a visual novel that has an unsettling and creepy atmosphere during the Halloween season should definitely check this visual novel out. Hope you enjoyed my review of Pumpkin Eater. Hey you, Have you been enjoying the Reviews 2.0 videos? Want to get an added bonus for viewing these videos? Like getting early access to these videos before they are released on YouTube? Or being able to request what movies and TV shows I should review next? Then please feel free to support these videos through my Patreon account. Check out all of the tier titles on my account and choose which tier title you want to be known as. You could become a new member on the block, an early bird, be a part of the future Bunch team, a backstage passenger, an animation superstar, and last but not least, the honorary supreme. So show off your tier title name to the world once you support the Reviews 2.0 videos through Patreon.